Very good. So good evening, all. Uh, my name is Don Bryant, and I'm the president of Cleveland Peace Action. I will be the moderator tonight, and we have a good panel to discuss our post-election direction. And we will start with an esteemed speaker, Philip Yenyo, Executive Director of the American Indian Movement, for a land welcome. Please, Philip.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Philip Yenyo. I am the Executive Director of the American Indian Movement of Ohio. And I'd like to take this time to thank the ancestors for allowing us to continue to live upon this land, to walk in a sacred way, in a sacred manner, respecting all things and everyone that is living upon this land. And this goes to all the nations that were once here, living freely without being impeded upon, which extends to the now extinct Erie Nation, the Huron, the Wyandot, the Anishinaabe, as some of you may know them as the Chippewa or the Ojibwe, the Kickapoo, the Potawatomi, and the Wyandot. So to those ancestors, we thank you. We ask you to help us have a productive meeting tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. I will introduce the topic now with a short statement, and then I'll introduce the speakers. So I may have people angry at me for the next 4 years for saying this, but at least I'll have a clean conscience. The election of 2024 was hard to tell. It was hard to tell who the lesser of two evils really was on war and peace issues, on some union issues, and immigrant rights issues. It was hard to tell. Let's not be judgmental if someone reveals that they voted their conscience in this election. And with that, I will introduce our speakers, and I will introduce all of them, and then we will start with Francis Chiappa will go first, but I'm going to introduce all the speakers first, alphabetically. Marc Alvarado is a program associate with the InterReligious Task Force on Central America and Colombia, and a board member of Cleveland Peace Action. Marc received a Bachelor of Music Performance from Cleveland Institute of Music. He is an ardent abolitionist and an anti-capitalist. Marc's days stumping for majority party presidential candidates are likely over. Harriet Applegate studied history at the University of Rochester and political science at the University of Cincinnati, graduated in the year 2000. She is the past executive secretary of the American Federation of Labor, Congress of Industrial Organizations, otherwise known as the AFL-CIO, and retired in 2021. Dr. Francis Chiappa has been a leader with Cleveland Peace Action and its earlier incarnation, the Nuclear Weapons Freeze Campaign, for more than 4 decades. He is a current CPA, Cleveland Peace Action board member. He also practices clinical psychology and family therapy. Arianna Mack, program manager of Healthy Communities and Climate with the Environmental Health Watch in Cleveland. She graduated from Gilmore Academy in 2018 and attended Miami University for her bachelor's and master's. Dr. Shereen Naser. Dr. Naser received her undergraduate degree from the University of Texas, Austin, and her graduate degree from Tulane University in New Orleans. Dr. Naser practiced as a school psychologist in New Orleans before coming to Cleveland State University. Dr. Naser is the director of the Cleveland Child and Adolescent Research and Education Lab, CARE Lab, which runs several projects each year and is always seeking student researchers. Welcome all, and welcome to our panelists, and we will begin. Go ahead, Francis, please.
Thank you, Don. So I'm going to address the 3 core issues that Peace Action has been working on for a long time: nuclear weapons, the military-industrial complex, and Israel-Palestine, and what we can expect under Trump 2.0. What might get worse and what might get better. and what are our opportunities? The Trump victory seems to signal a time of political realignment in many ways, and this is true also in the area of foreign policy. So things might get worse, might get better. What would be worse? Trump is likely to be a greater enabler of Israel. Genocidal war and erasure of Palestine and Palestinians will be more acceptable in Trump's White House. Soon to be ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, doesn't recognize the existence of Palestinians or Palestine. What might be better? The Ukraine war might come to a negotiated end. Biden and Zelensky were not giving in stubbornly. Trump is not much concerned with defending the Ukraine at all costs. And he has a relationship with Putin and sees himself as a deal maker. So he may be in a better position to broker a peace than was Biden, with the Ukraine, of course, ceding some territory. More generally in foreign policy, Trump may be less inclined to fight overseas wars. The US, both parties for decades have pursued global hegemony in the name of democracy, the democracy in quotes. Trump seems more skeptical of military interventions. And his vice president, J.D. Vance, probably the future face of the Republican Party, seems to be even more skeptical of foreign wars. So that might be something that we want to see. In our advocacy work in the past, we focused more on the Sherrod Browns and less on the J.D. Vances. But going forward, we're going to have to talk to Republicans and explore common ground. And the far right, what some people would say nutballs in Congress, are less hawkish than many centrist Democrats. Now, what about nuclear weapons? We're currently undergoing a modernization at the cost of $1.7 trillion over 30 years. This is a huge waste of tax dollars, and it's making us less safe. And the US is leading a global arms race. Trump seems to favor expanding this arms race and spending more money even. The potential for nuclear war is greater than ever. The doomsday clock is set at 90 seconds to midnight, closest it's ever been to Armageddon. Tensions have heightened with Russia over the Ukraine war and between Israel and Iran, threatening a nuclear engagement. And the abandonment of Cold War treaties is nearly complete and will be complete in 2026. So can Trump, the deal maker, make deals and reduce tensions with Iran, China, Russia, North Korea? I would say all of the above are unlikely, and maybe I'd be surprised if he meets any of these. Unfortunately, most people, the general public, are much less aware of nuclear war, and they're not worried about it. So it's probably going to be a non-issue in terms of a mass movement. The military-industrial complex, which I would use if I was visiting the halls of Congress, the war industry, the war machine, how do we fight this? It's David and Goliath. We used to present on the US massive military spending, and people, instead of motivating our audience, it made them and us feel even more helpless. So my sense is that fighting the military-industrial complex directly hasn't worked and will not work. Think about it in this way. Violence is thoroughly embedded in our culture and our history. Settler colonialism and genocide were the hallmarks of the explicit attempt to erase Native Americans. And it was done in a violent way. The military-industrial complex, on the other hand, enjoys wide and deep public support, both at a national and at a local level. A big concern for us is that Trump has pledged to crack down on his opponents. One way to do this is to revoke the tax-exempt status of these organizations, and a bill doing just that passed the House of Representatives recently, the HR 9495. Those of us working, I think, for justice for Palestine are likely to be the prime targets of this assault on us. So how do we further expose the folly of hegemonic US foreign policy? What are the cracks that we can expand? The only way to resist the military and industrial complex, in my view, is by focusing on specific issues, ones that the public is actively worried about. So I think the primary issue going forward for us will be the genocide in Gaza and the ongoing injustices in Palestine. The Democrats have been phobic about addressing this in any way. Some people think that it helped them lose the election. Peter Bryant, who we had here as a speaker many years ago, wrote in the New York Times under this title a couple of weeks ago, "Democrats ignored Gaza and it brought down their party." Progressives and young people were alienated by the Democrats' deafness on Gaza and Palestine, and are in an ongoing way, alienated by the hypocrisy of a government that works supposedly in defense of democracy while at the same time funding genocide. So what can we do? We won't be able to sway public opinion on issues that are not in the news, military-industrial complex, nukes. Not to say that we should ignore these issues, but a groundswell won't be initiated by us in Cleveland or by National Peace Action on these issues. The issue of our time, of this moment, is Palestine. What the nuclear freeze was to activism in the 1980s, Palestine is today. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Francis. Very well said. Next, we will go to Dr. Shereen Naser for her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for having me. I don't know how I'm going to go after that. That was such a good and succinct summary, Dr. Chiappa. I really appreciate it. Maybe I can provide something more specific as a Palestinian to how I think about this moment. So we were given a list of questions to prepare for today, and one of the first ones was, what was our assessment of the 2024 election? I was a college student when Bush Jr. was elected, and in the post 9/11 world. I remember going to Washington, D.C. On a kind of work school trip, and we had a chance to meet a Washington insider who had been there for almost 5 different administrations. He was a long time person working in Washington. And I remember sitting there and him telling me, and I'll never forget this moment, him saying, "It doesn't ever matter who the president is. It's the same gears inside that keep turning." I can't say that I fully agree with that, especially right now. I wonder what he would say or if he would change that now. But one of the things I remember from being an Arab, a Palestinian post 9/11, and doing anti-war protesting against the war in Iraq when I was in college, is that that work never stops, whoever the president is, because it does seem like war is bipartisan. There's bipartisan acceptance of war. As a Palestinian, I see this everywhere. I see it in the way AIPAC funds candidates. I see it in the way anti-Palestinian racism plays out, even in spaces that are meant to be progressive. Marc Lamont Hill wrote a great book called Except for Palestine, talking about this issue. My assessment of the 2024 election, however, is that I think a lot of things will stay the same for Palestinians in this moment, and maybe even get worse, but that our work as people was not going to be different no matter who was president. That our work to stay together, to stand in solidarity, to push the issue of Palestine, to address settler colonialism was not going to be changed no matter who was president. I do think the outcome of the 2024 presidential election is one that shows us the pain of people broadly and the disenfranchisement of voters, whether they are young progressive voters or even rural conservative voters in places like Southern Ohio. I think the people are fed up. They're absolutely fed up with the way our government runs. And the 2024 election showed that we are vulnerable. We are vulnerable to whoever is willing to speak about that and promise something, even if it's a lie. And at the end of the day, the Democratic Party continues to speak to centrist and right conservative people instead of embracing its more progressive voters. And I think that's part of the reason why we're in the situation we're in now. Challenges that I foresee with a Trump presidency and a Republican majority Congress, I think it's going to enable more racist, homophobic, and toxic individual and narratives. I'm already seeing it now. I'm a school psychologist by training. I'm already seeing it happening in schools. But I think that at least now it's out in the open. I grew up in the South, in a small town in Texas, and then I lived in New Orleans for 10 years and Louisiana. And I'll tell you what, sometimes I prefer the racism of the South, some of the racism I see up here, because at least people have it right up in your face. It is really difficult to name and fight back against racism often, especially with what Dr. Chiappa was speaking of earlier with the mass movement, when people are just pretending to be nice to each other. Gloria Ladson-Billings calls this the niceness that ends up in neoliberalism. I think the only way that we fight this, as I mentioned earlier, is standing in solidarity with each other and also coalescing with our groups and community in true, authentic solidarity across different groups with different interests, and that our relationships are what is going to fight back against these government oppressions. As a Palestinian, this is core to my culture. It's core to how my people have always moved in collective versus as individuals. And so I think in the coming days, hopefully, when people can see the outward racism that Trump brings to office, that people will find community, that they will fight in community and in collective. And I think really, truly, that's the only way we're going to win this.
Thank you very much, Shereen. Very well said. Speaking the truth here. I appreciate you. And next up, we will hear from whose third is very good. Let me see, Ms. Arianna Mack. Arianna Mack, please.
Hi. So I'm here to talk about environmental justice and climate. And I'm going to use EJ as an abbreviation for environmental justice. I want to shortchange, put that up front. But transparently, I immediately started to think about the ways we would have to remediate the earth after 4 more years of this upcoming administration. And I really want to level set this sentiment, so I'll take a few steps back. The Biden administration, admittedly, was possibly the most effective administration we've ever seen for climate issues. And I'm just going to briefly highlight 3 things that this administration did. First, it established the first ever White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And so this was a committee comprised of EJ leaders and experts that were able to advise people in office on ways to increase federal government efforts related to environmental justice. Then there was also the government-wide Justice 40 initiative, which intended to provide 40% of overall benefits from federal investments relating to climate change, clean energy, other areas that communities are disadvantaged or marginalized and overburdened by pollution. It was specifically supposed to address that. And then lastly, it was also responsible for the climate and economic justice screening tool, which really helps agencies identify communities that they should be putting a bunch of resources in, basically, and help with decision-making process from the federal government. So previously in the Trump administration, his first term, he basically gutted federal climate initiatives while attempting to roll back, which I think it was around 120 environmental protections that were critical to safeguarding people and the planet. Many were halted, many of those that he was trying to roll back, but his actions are very telling of his disposition on climate and the environment. On an international stage, something I want to highlight is that he pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which, if you don't know what that is, it is a legally binding international treaty that aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to the effects of climate change. And so now, again, the US is expected to pull out of the Paris Agreement once he goes back in office and reduce climate financial assistance to vulnerable nations, which is how that works on a national or international scale. On a national scale, he's declared intentions for the upcoming administration to cut on carbon emissions, to move away from to move back to fossil fuels, even though this current administration moved away. And he's also called for the repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is Biden's signature climate law. Again, transparently, it directly affects a lot of good work that I've been able to be a part of and fortunate enough to work with, and which has really been an environmental justice renaissance with this Biden administration. So I do believe, as unfortunate as it is, the EJ community specifically, this kind of thing is the norm, because, like I said, this was kind of a renaissance that we were just in on a federal level. But we believe not just at Environmental Health Watch, but also in the EJ space in general, that community members lead to change efforts for the betterment of the community. So our issue of concerning is not only teaching, but maintaining resilience in all neighborhoods. We operate off of the belief that environmental justice is about decision making, and that is our approach to everything. So that means that climate and democracy are the same issue, but also moving forward, we have to do a better job of making sure everyone participates. We really want to help people understand how climate connects specifically with things they care about, and that we all can make a difference about that. We also want to invite a broader diversity of our neighbors into accessible action that will benefit their lives and livelihoods. I also personally foresee a major share of the burden that's being taken away in funding from the federal government placed back on the local and state level, but also in the private space and philanthropic spaces. There's been a rise of green banks in the last 5 years, and so hoping that they're able to persevere through this next administration. And really, all of our collective efforts will be able to focus on, if the community is uplifted and that work is essential, then hopefully we'll be able to kind of maintain what we have to then get an administration that believes in climate again.
Thank you, Arianna. You gave me an education. I wasn't aware of Biden's great climate record. Thank you so much. And all of our panelists are staying well within their time, which gives us more time for discussion in a few minutes. But first, we'll hear from Marc Alvarado.
Thank you, Don, and I will try to do the same. Is the audio okay? Okay, great. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone. I will apologize. I live in a century-old house that is very drafty, so I am coming to you bundled up in my bed next to my fiance. I did the same as Shereen before. I responded to a question submitted to us by Don. And I'm going to go ahead and go through that right now. First of all, what is your assessment of the 2024 election? Obviously, it's really, really bad. But I'm preoccupied with the question of how bad is it? And I'm not saying that we don't need to be alarmed. It's not just Trump and the presidential election. The seemingly blank check that he will get with majorities in both houses of Congress, not to mention in the judicial branch. But I'm thinking of how bad it has been. From the perspective of an advocate for demilitarization, for humane immigration policies, for human rights throughout the global South, I have to consider what our partners, and speaking from my perspective as a volunteer for the InterReligious Task Force on Central America and Colombia, what our partners in Central and South America have been having to survive, regardless of whether or not we have a Democratic or Republican administration. 44 years and 3 days ago, on December 2nd, 1980, and many, if not all of you on the call here know of this story, but four women from the United States, Marinol sisters Mara Clark and Ida Ford of Marinol, New York, and from Cleveland, Ursuline's sister Dorothy Kazel and layperson Jean Donovan were murdered in El Salvador. They were assassinated, which is to say that they were targeted. Their murders were planned by security forces of the Salvadoran government, security forces who were trained and funded by the US government. These four women were living and working in El Salvador, in deep relationship with poor and indigenous people who were exploited and subject to horrific state violence at the hands of a government that was receiving military aid from the United States. The women wrote to officials in the United States government, to the Carter administration, advocating against the violence they were witnessing, against the United States government's role in this violence. Jean Donovan was the daughter of a military contractor, so she recognized arms and equipment that were made solely for U.S. government contract. Um, they were advocating for the lives of people with whom they were building community. And with their solidarity, they set an example, a legacy for all of us who came after them. Um, and indeed, the work that IRTF does is advocacy and popular education. There are organizations that do direct support work for migrants and refugees. And IRTF works in coalition with many of these groups. But IRTF and other organizations and communities like it exist to look upstream, to look at the root causes of migration, the ways in which state violence and environmental degradation forces people from their homes, from their land, and to make a very perilous trip to to wealthier countries, such as within the European Union or the United States. And the United States has always treated Mesoamerica as its breadbasket, as its backyard to do with as it pleases. This this drives foreign policy. This drives our economic and trade policy, and creates the conditions that our partners have been surviving for decades. Assessing the implications for our partners, community organizers, human rights defenders, journalists. Um, in Central America and Colombia. Um, I have to admit, I don't know what is coming next for them. Um, but also, each US president has been progressively one worse than the one before it for colonized peoples, for IRTF and other groups and communities who are doing this work of advocacy for human rights, especially for the rights of those so adversely affected by neoliberal US policy. I think the work for us will continue to be what it has always been, which is not to intervene and to dictate solutions from here in the United States, but to listen to and to learn from our partners with whom we have been in relationship with. That was the first question. I beg your pardon. Secondly, what challenges do you foresee with a Trump presidency and a Congress with Republican majorities? Um, I think it's important to recognize what it is we are to resist. And I think I touched on that with our first question. But I want to go a little further and say that I would be greatly relieved if we only had to worry about the ego of one individual who has self-promoted and bought his way into the presidency of the United States. Um, if we are and if we are to believe in calls from Trump's camp, from his base, for an isolationist foreign policy, uh, we can look to the possibility that that could lead to common ground with those of us who want to see an end to U.S. support for governments that are known to commit human rights violations. And and if we were only dealing with one unhinged president, a presidency that is essentially a very fickle personality, I would think that our path to finding that common ground might be much easier. But I see this administration as a culmination of decades-long efforts by Christian nationalists, working with capitalists and oligarchs to craft a federal government that, in all three branches, favors rugged capitalism, patriarchy, and white supremacy. And and that I think is not so fickle. And that I think will be a serious challenge for us to overcome with this coming administration. Thirdly, how will this be any different from the Biden administration? Again, I don't know what difference a Trump administration, what difference it makes for refugees have already been displaced. Um, as with, Palestine, as with Sudan, as with, you know, all these areas of tremendous conflict and genocide around the world, genocide is still genocide. Displacement is and land grabs are still happening. Um, this is not a change. Um, what I think we are seeing now and will see with this Trump administration is toxic masculinity becoming emboldened. We can continue to expect more militarized responses domestically to activists and organizers using our First Amendment rights. Um, just this week, we've seen students' homes raided by the FBI over graffiti. Um, and we have continuously seen um, oppression and repression here in the United States, regardless of administration, for those of us who consider ourselves to be radicals, for those of us who are advocating for peace. But there is hope too. We have seen, if I may say so, family members of people here in Cleveland being released from unjust detention in Palestine. We see things like RICO cases against water protectors and land defenders that are finally being dropped. For those of us in the nonprofit sector, we will see funding dry up. I'm especially concerned for migrant and refugee support organizations who are already preparing to lose their federal funding, something that I think IRTF has long tried to inoculate itself against, in that, we do not seek or, receive federal grants.
Thank you, Mark. If you could just tie it up in a couple sentences.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Thank you.
We are also seeing a mass movement towards mutual aid, towards community care, and understanding that the government is not set up necessarily to serve the people, but to exploit them. And I think in this, the four women from 1980 gave us a blueprint for what solidarity looks like. We need to learn how to be in community with each other, how to take care of and show up for each other, and how this kind of solidarity cannot be confined within borders. I'll finish with a quote from Dara Atkinson, Executive Director of Trans Ohio, the oldest statewide trans organization in the state, who recently said, "What we see at this stage of fascism in so many countries around the world is that everyday people doing mundane compliance is what allows them to scale up quickly. So we need our allies to be actively non-compliant in every way available to them." And we will see this, I think, in community defense of migrants. I think one thing I want to consider is that the appetite that local law enforcement will have for enforcing draconian immigration policies will be greatly diminished when they are seeing all of the neighbors in the neighborhood surrounding the house and remaining steadfast in their belief that their neighbors will not be taken. And that is the end of my comments. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Great assessment. Appreciate you. Next up, we have Harriet Applegate. You're on mute, I believe.
Okay.
Here we go. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to sort of go through some of the questions that that Don gave us and half not. So I think I might want to start just saying that I worked extremely hard for 3 months every day to on the Supreme Court races, Sherrod Brown and Issue 1. So I was really immersed totally in the political process for all of August, all of September, and all of October. So, for me, it was, the election was pretty devastating. And I share, people's anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist, and essentially anti-corporate views completely, but my career has been really operating within the system, both within the labor movement and the Democratic Party. So I'm coming from rather different perspective. And as you can imagine, the election was not only devastating to me because of my history, but also because of the 12-hour days, 7-day weeks that I participated in. And it was basically to kind of stave off what I thought was, a fascist tide. And so it's taken me some time to kind of readjust. And I think some of the challenges with the Trump presidency and Republican majorities in both houses is, number one, it's pretty scary. But I think it's important for those who oppose what they're doing or what they're trying to do to coalesce and move as quickly as possible and be ready to seize the opportunities that I think we're going to be will inevitably present themselves, because I do believe there will be a lot of overreach on their part. Certainly Trump is engaging already in overreach, and he's got a lot of people surrounding him who are already engaged in a lot of overreach. And the other thing about the Project 2025 people is I believe that they are so ideological, so clearly embedded in essentially anti-democratic fascist belief system that they lose strategy because of that. Being that ideological makes them less strategic. And I believe they'll make attempts to steamroll a lot of their agenda, and it will be an overreach. And I specifically think, they're going to go after Obamacare. They're going to make this enemies list. They're going to dry up funding for nonprofits. They're going to fire, tons of people in the federal government who actually, make sure that stuff happens on time. And it seems like there's a good, and then these tariffs will be, will make prices go up. And so I think there will be lots of opportunities to show that this is not a good direction that we're going in. And I believe that it's critically important. Well, I guess just to keep going, I think we know it's going to be different from Biden. We don't yet know how successful they will be in their attempt at really truly radical change in a bad direction, I think almost entirely. And the more successful they are in mass deportations, firing of civil servants, going after enemies, imposing punishing tariffs, and that's the more opportunities to spark movements against these efforts. And if it's a clown show with his ridiculous cabinet appointments, and they stumble around and do nothing, kind of like what happened sort of in 2016, it might be harder than if the Project 2025 ideologues start moving on things like Obamacare, Medicare, and even Social Security. It's much more likely this time around they won't waste time, and that a lot of the ridiculous stuff Trump does will serve as a cover for the 2025ers to steamroll their agenda. And so I think I think that what I would urge everyone is that for those who have been on the very, very progressive left of the political spectrum, I think there's a silver lining in that there's going to be a whole bunch more people who are going to be resisting what's going on. And I would encourage folks, and I think coalition building is critically important, not only because there are going to be lots more people, maybe up to 45% of the people who are adamantly opposed to what's going on, but also it's really important that grassroots groups coalesce and work together to push the Democratic Party, get rid of the corporate control of the Democratic Party, just like Bernie is trying to do. And the only way that could happen is that there's a really strong grassroots movement that's, completely bottom up, that literally fuels a larger progressive movement that the Democratic Party cannot ignore. I don't see, unless we have either civil war or a revolution, that that there's another alternative to get rid of some of these, some of this essentially fascist movement that we have that has been unmasked with Project 2025. And I want to point out that in this campaign, there were so many people, and in particular, older people who were desperately committed to a more democratic society, and who were a little bit limited in what they could do physically. And so that's why there was this huge popularity of these postcard parties that took place, I think, all over the country, but they certainly happened here. And it struck me that the postcards probably weren't very effective. We're pretty sure they weren't. And that was a lot of time and effort and money that went into sending them. One postcard stamp is 56 cents. So these postcards it ended up being not only labor intensive and labor costly, but financially costly. But it was something that people who were very seriously committed could do. And it seems to me that there needs to be some sort of I'm not sure what the word would be, not arrangement, but some sort of bonding maybe that takes place between the people in their 70s and older who have a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, a lot of know-how, and a lot of skills, with people who were in their 20s and younger. I remember, some of the younger people that were working on the Sherrod Brown campaign expressed, a real desire for more training, more understanding of what it was like to be a community organizer, what it's like to be an organizer, and older people who've been through. Yeah, I got my start in the anti-war movement, so community organizing wasn't so alien to me as it is, I think, to young people in their 20s now. And there were so many movements in the 60s and 60s, basically 60s, that people really, if you were in any one of them, you sort of got OJT in the movement, and that doesn't happen anymore. So older people could really, I think, who care deeply and who are very progressive, could really be harnessed to team up with people in their 20s who haven't had any of these experiences. So I think that the coalition building and it is critically important. And I think the most important thing, perhaps of all, is that people on the far left need to join forces with people with progressives who aren't quite so far to the left, to work against this tide of fascism, of anti-democracy, of corporate control of everything, and join forces so that we can take back our country in all aspects. And it has to start from the grassroots. It's the only place it could start. And I would encourage, more than anything else, broad coalition, grassroots coalition building. And we need to work together. Everybody has a niche, but it's critically important that we get together and fight this fight.
Thank you, Harriet. Any last comment? Your time's up, but if you wanted to finish up.
Oh, no, I think I'm
You're good. Thank you for a well thought way forward. And I want to thank all the panelists for your concise assessments and path forward ideas about what we're going to do. So now we will open it up, the floor, to questions and answers and discussion, generally questions and answers, but some discussion too, because the Cleveland Peace Action will actually use this seminar today to help us with our strategy for the coming year. So if I could ask Jim to help me look through some of the chat questions, and we won't limit it just to the chat questions. You can also raise your hand, but we're going to start with the chat questions.
Yeah, sure thing. We've got I was able to identify 4 or 5 of them in the chat so far. First one was from Doug at 714. Can we tell Trump's direction on nukes and US foreign policy by the people he picks for cabinet?
And I should say this, anyone can answer if it's not directed to a certain person on the panel, but of course you can tell by the topic that this one sounds like it's directed towards Francis.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
and I think it was during when I was speaking. Well, yes, in a way, I feel like Trump's cabinet selections are not serious in any way. I mean, Harriet referred to them as a bunch of clowns, the clown cabinet, and I think that's accurate. So in a way, I don't think we can tell. In a way, I don't think Trump knows what policy even means. That's why the Project 2025 people behind the scenes are going to have a lot to say, and I think it's going to be chaotic, just like the first administration. So I'm not sure what we can tell from those things. Except I think it's going to be Project 2025. So more military spending, bigger budgets, bigger increases than the Democrats who always voted for increases, bigger than that, and a more bellicose foreign policy. Yeah.
Any other panelists want to touch on that? Yeah. Jim, what we got next?
Next one I saw was from Kathy Coleman at 720, asking about where's the panelist for reproductive rights and Black women, and they mentioned joining a women's march in Cleveland on January 18th. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to field that one.
I'll maybe say something about that. I don't disagree in any way, shape, or form. But I also think that one of the things that we have to do moving forward in order to truly build collective power, and it's been said a couple times here, is that we have to stop seeing single issues as only single issues, but rather all fully connected. As a Palestinian, Palestine is a reproductive justice issue. It's a climate issue. It is a military industrial complex issue. And so we could have a panel with 50 people representing every single issue that would be important to a progressive person. But really, truly, these conversations have to start working across issues to understand the underlying fascism that's feeding all of it.
I would just like to add to that last point that the intersectionality, especially in our own work in climate and environment, there's no justice if our people aren't healthy. And so I think from that standpoint, that it all should be tied in together.
Thank you. And Jim, I thought I saw a question from Pat Boloviak earlier. Pat, do you just want to take the floor, or should we try to find your question? Go ahead to the next one.
I guess part of
You go ahead.
my issue there was that since we can't expect much favorable legislation, that we need to be much more emphatic and much more organized on what we do on an individual basis. And I mentioned the No Thanks app, which I've found to be useful to help me be more effective in boycotting. And you just scan the barcode and it'll tell you if it has any information about the manufacturer supporting Zionism. and that I think we can do that whether we're working on the environment and trying to do to push the little things like laundry detergent sheets, which are my big change lately. But just what thoughts do people have as far as individual and grassroots actions? Anybody?
I might be able to, I feel like I started the first time, so I want to take a minute in case some of my other panelists want to share. But I'll just quickly note that I do think that the individual action is important, and also our collective action at that, like you're using the words grassroots. Like, for example, if you're using the No Thanks app, one of the things we've been doing is we've been targeting specific companies like Key Bank or Coca-Cola. Might even go around the grocery store. I'm not saying I did this, and put stickers on those products to let everybody shopping know. That to me is a collective action. Because in isolation, we can only do so much, but together we can do so much more, particularly just in your neighborhood. My organization, the Cleveland Palestine Advocacy Community, right now is pushing for divestment of the $16 million that Cuyahoga County has invested in Israel bonds. And we're pushing for that collectively, not because, we can't do divestment individually by not buying Coca-Cola products, but there's something powerful about showing up week after week and pushing together against what can seem like a behemoth, and organizing ourselves around those principles.
Yeah, I totally want to underscore what Shereen just said, because I think it's not enough to do, and it's important to do individual actions, and it's important to, just like it's important to recycle and reduce, but it's not enough. And nobody should think that that because the enemies, the challenges are so great that the only thing we can do is the small things that are under our control. I think we should also really figure out ways to work, even if it's just locally, to do collective action. Because individual action is not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
Let me add a little bit to that. After the election, the first election dissection panel that I listened to was just a week after the election, and it was Massachusetts Peace Action had a guy named Stephen Kinzer as the speaker. He wrote the book on the sordid history over 120 years, 130 years of U.S. interventionism in Latin America and elsewhere in the world. It's a wonderful book. But he teaches at Brown University, and he said in the classes the week after the election that he did not find any despair whatsoever. People were energized. These young students were really, really energized about what they could do and what the openings were for this election. And so I love the idea of pairing, older and so being an older activist of finding a way to find that synergy. But another thing that Kinzer said in his talk was that what we can accomplish by lobbying Congress and that there are limitations to that. And that really, if we want to win hearts and minds, it's in our own communities, and it's on a personal basis. The people we know and the people we will know going forward.
Yep. We're going to take one more from the chat, and then I'll call on Nina. Thank you.
Okay, I see that Michael listed. I'll read what he posted here. Trump may be less inclined to engage in foreign wars. That doesn't mean he will engage constructively in the international community. His deportation policy suggests that he will not, and his past record of praise for repressive dictators, especially Putin, promises to embolden right-wing extremists around the world. That won't end well for anyone. So the question is, can we foster useful international engagement while Trump is bent on destructive international policies?
I would jump in here if that's okay, unless Don, you have.
Please.
Sure. Well, I'm jumping in to answer to say I'm really not sure how to answer. I think we can foster useful international engagement. I think we need to empower ourselves to believe that international engagement isn't solely in the hands of the states or of the corporations. But I think the real obstacle is in trying to foster this community that I think all of my esteemed fellow panelists have been talking about, how we engage with each other, how we engage with each other in relationship. That takes time, it takes trust. And I think, we need to reground ourselves in these efforts of building relationships with each other, including across borders, as many of us do. Um, but I don't know that this can happen quickly enough to affect uh, change in a more expedient manner. I think um, a lot of the time, a lot of time since the election, and really since before that, I've spent trying to pull myself out of the despair that is uh, an acceptance that people will die. And that happens regardless of what, I think it happens regardless of what of who is in the Oval Office. Um, we are still seeing our comrades and our loved ones die around the world, and that's going to continue to happen. But I think we have to we still have to persist and try to cultivate this community, these relationships with each other, but recognize that um, we we have to take that into our own hands. And it's quite obvious that I think, the governments will not do this for us.
Thank you, Mark. Anybody else on that one? All righty. Nina, please. Nice to see you.
Hi, everybody. I so much agree with what the panelists said about building coalitions locally and getting away from single issue activism to address the broader issues. In regard to what we can do locally, as Francis was saying, I think one avenue that could be promising is for activists in their cities to talk with their local governments about what can be done to protect vulnerable citizens, residents in their cities. So one example, and Harriet, you would know much more about this than I do. Cleveland Heights recently passed legislation aimed at protecting queer residents, trans in particular, and their access to healthcare and so forth. And I understand that there is some movement in Lakewood and Cleveland to talk with those councils about passing something similar. Now, it doesn't have to be specifically about that particular issue. But I did call one of my council people in Shaker Heights And she agreed that there were probably lots of vulnerable residents in Shaker who could be targeted. And she agreed that it was time for our local municipal representatives to begin talking about what could be done. So I think that's an avenue for people to get together in their local community. They may have been active in a variety of other issues, but I think that's something that could be bring people together in a productive way that would be resistance and trying to take stands and hold ground even before the Trump administration might come down on us in various ways. I also would recommend the National Indivisible website has a guide to resistance that I think is very helpful and a very good place to start thinking strategically.
Could I not what Nina said sparked a few things that I should have mentioned. One local issue that very much needs progressive support is ranked choice voting. And the Cleveland Heights Charter Review Commission recommended ranked choice voting for consideration in Cleveland Heights. In Lakewood, the same thing is going on. And the University Heights Charter Review Commission also recommended ranked choice voting, although the council did not pass that through. So I do know that the part of Project 2025 is to try to make ranked choice voting illegal all over the country. But it's very definitely an important national movement that really does diminish the influence, the importance of the political parties, and encourages wider participation in the political process. And it's also something that's really on the chopping block of the far right. So, I was going to mention something else. I do think that local action is critically important. And that's just an example, another, an example of something people could work to do. So.
I have a quick comment.
Please, Philip.
I think what I'm hearing from everybody is where it pertains to building coalition amongst the organizations is really vital. I do believe that what Marc said is true, that it does take a lot of trust building for our community, our Native American community. The only time that anybody ever saw us was when we were down at the ballpark protesting. I've been invited to different demonstrations downtown, but they always seem to come like at the last minute. And I don't plan by going at the last minute. If the organizations would get together and say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, you already know in advance, far in advance, what you're going to do. If you want support or shown support from the American Indian Movement of Ohio to show up there, you got to give me time, because a lot of times these events are taking place at a time when I'm working. I own my own business, okay? And I can't get a bunch of people together at the last minute to do a demonstration or go support other organizations. If we're going to do this, that's where some of the trust building starts. Now, I just received a message from somebody in the room here, and this is where we're talking about trust. Sasha Murtaugh sends me a private message here. Are you a Zionist? And I responded, who, me? I'm Native American. Yes, I remember you from a protest. You were waving an Israeli flag downtown. Don't lie. Let me tell you something, ma'am. I have never been to any other protests except for our protests downtown. So if you're going to accuse somebody, you better make sure you know exactly who you're accusing, because I have never been to any other organizations demonstrations except for when it was when Art McCoy had the Black on Black crime organization, and we were going down there protesting on October 22nd against police brutality. So I want you to walk that statement back, and I expect an apology publicly, verbally, audibly, right here, right now. Thank you.
Yes, I certainly don't know where that came from. I know Philip has been helped us bring in Mazen Kamsia, and actually from Palestine. So I don't know where this came from. If the person would honor Philip with an apology, we would appreciate that. Thank you. If we could move on to the next chat question.
Yeah, Rick posted a question in the chat. What parts of your advocacy work, I think this was directed at the panelists, or maybe any of the organizations present, what parts of your advocacy work, such as green banks, may be more local and somewhat immune from national politics? Or are they immune? What advantages do we have as grassroots organizations? And a couple of guests already mentioned this. So yeah, if any panelists would want to weigh in further on that.
I can jump in. I think from it's more of an infrastructure game now, and seeing what we can advocate for and keep true here. Like the city of Cleveland and the county, Cuyahoga County, still have control of the land, so making sure natural spaces and green spaces are utilized the way that we want to see them. There's also our waterway, especially the lake being such a force. I think there's a lot that can be done there that the federal government would not be able to infiltrate. But I do foresee like tax incentives being taken away. There's renewable energy becomes trickier. And especially with he wants to take away all of it and reinstate fossil fuels and not really help with the transition, or more so reverse the transition. And so I do think there are ways that we are immune, but it takes a lot of local government not giving up as the administration changes, and not forgetting what are priorities. And that's what we advocate for. And really what we try to see is empower communities to make their own decisions about their own neighborhood. And so hopefully from result of that synergy, that it wouldn't be infiltrated and changed.
Thank you. Anybody else on that one? I did remove the person who was offensive. They sent messages to other panelists as well. I hope I got the right person. Very good. Jim, you see any more questions in the chat?
That's all that I've been able to pull out, but I could have missed some. So if I did, somebody would either raise your hand or post the question again in the chat, then we can pull it up that way.
And I do have a question. I belong to an organization called Labor and Community for an Independent Party. It's national. We're small. We've been around for quite a few years. We put out statements and have conferences. It's to build an independent party. And when you talk independent politics, it doesn't mean at the presidential level right off the bat, because, then you're a spoiler. I understand that. But independent politics at a local level is important to me. Any thoughts on that, future in that? And one last comment, when I see the gridlock between the two parties, and they're both the war parties, as you know, I think we need other voices in our government. Anybody on that, please?
Well, I would say that ranked choice voting is a good way to make the major political parties much less important. Ranked choice voting could foster multiple parties. It did that in Cincinnati, and it in New York City when they had it. There were more communists elected to the New York City Council than there were Republicans. So.
Thank you. Also, there's been a move to abolish the electoral college as well, and we heard about that on Democracy Now! The day after the election. So there's an organization working on that. Anybody else?
Yeah, if I could jump in, I was one of the folks that Harriet sent out to do canvassing during those weeks leading up to the election, and it's my sense that we would be better off sort of think of it as infiltrating the Democratic Party, rather than inventing a new party. I think there is opportunity to do that. We certainly did that in Cleveland Heights, but you can see what good that did. It was only Cleveland Heights, right? But that can happen other places too. But that's a really slow slog. But getting outside of the partisan, the political party aspect, I've been thinking about what it is that unites us, and intersectionally, that it unites all these different struggles. And the right loves to talk about freedom, but I would say what unites us is injustice, which is the absence of freedom to be yourself and to be who you are and to achieve your potential. So whether you're Palestinian or trans or a woman in Texas, needing prenatal care, all of these are examples of people who are facing injustice at the hands of a monolithic system. And I wonder if we can see this as a commonality between our struggles. The Republican Party is not the Freedom Party. We're the Freedom Party. We on the left, not the broader left, not the Democrats. We're the Freedom Party. It's for freedom to be who you are, and the right and the opportunity to be who you are on a level playing field. I'd love to hear what other people think about that.
Well, I'd just like to say that freedom always has to be counterbalanced with justice, because the libertarians are for freedom, but they don't give a damn about justice. So I think freedom and justice need to be inextricably linked when we talk about us. But I love your point about infiltrating the Democratic Party. It really needs to happen. The Democratic Party showed its in this election showed its bankruptcy, and this is a time for the grassroots to invade the Democratic Party. The strategy was wrong. The reliance on the billionaires was wrong. Republican light was wrong. So, and they know it, but it won't change unless people move ahead and take it back. it'll go on and just get weaker and weaker, and then we'll have one party. So I mean, it's really ripe for infiltration.
You know, a related thing here, one of the battles the Democratic Party lost in this election was, and I'm surprised this hasn't come up until now in this meeting, social media. They actually absolutely blew opportunities on social media and in the blogosphere, or whatever you want to call it. They blew opportunities to take an advantage there, and that's a grassroots arena. That's the Republicans have out grassrootsed us in this election.
Wow, good points. If we could just take an intermission, I have a couple announcements and then we'll get back to more questions. I'm going to do a screen share in a moment. While I'm looking for that, oh, there it is. This is an up and coming program. We're gonna screen the film Downwind one more time. We showed it out at John Carroll University a few weeks ago, or a month ago, and Downwind is about the people living out by the nuclear test site in Nevada, the past nuclear test site, and still are affected by the cancers to this day. So that'll be at West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church, December 14th at 7. And the other thing I'd like to mention is that we have had a passing of some of our activists in the past year, and I'd like to mention them. Dan Cavoli of the Brunswick group called Interfaith Council for Peace in the Middle East, and other organizations. He was a teacher at one of the near West Side Catholic schools. Dan Cavoli. I'd like to remember Nahida Halaby Gordon from Worcester. She taught at Case Western, and she's written a book about her days in Palestine and the culture and the resistance. Nahida Halaby Gordon, and we lost her this year as well. And she's actually a 1948 Palestinian that was expulsed from her home in 1948 at the age of 8. And also Ruth Tracy, who used to be the one that was bringing the Palestinian olive oil to all the events. And thank you very much. I'd like to remember them. Presente. And one last announcement. If anyone would like to volunteer with Cleveland Peace Action, please put your information in the chat and we'll put you to work, inshallah, which means God willing in Arabic. Any case, next questions, please.
And I want to mention that Donald Gordon, Nahida's husband, also passed away about a month after she did. And he was also with Interfaith Council for Peace in the Middle East.
Don, I'd like to add one thing about the showing of Downwind. The director of that film, Marc Shapiro, will be at that showing for a question and answer period. So it's a really good opportunity to find out more about how that film came into being and what other projects Shapiro has in the works now.
Michael, do we need reservations or just show up?
Just show up.
And it's free.
It's free.
Thank you.
It's free, except the cost of the films are really expensive. Some of them are like a couple $100 or more, maybe even much higher. So they do ask for donations for anybody who's willing to contribute.
That's correct. But it's not required.
Nina, you're muted. Are you trying to speak?
Someone earlier in the question period talked about what could be done with community-owned banks. And I think that's, wonder if anybody on the panel might speak more to that. Because as we've noted, the federal government under the new administration is likely to cut off funding for all kinds of things, environment and but other things that are important to communities. And it seems to me that we ought to know more about community-owned banks that would be a finance and pool our local money for things that local communities or regions need. So if anybody has more information or ideas about that, I think that would be interesting to hear.
Yeah, we recently had an action to Cleveland Peace Action and Cleveland Nonviolence Network coalesced to on Black Friday to disengage from capitalism. We did put out a few emails or posts about 10 or 12 ways to do that, to disengage from capitalism. You know, join co-ops, credit unions, join credit unions. Don't shop at big box stores, including Amazon. And that could go on indefinitely. And definitely endorse our shop at our local family-owned stores. You can always get some good buys there as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I do, you know, like on in Cleveland Heights, there was the Coventry merchants sort of have gotten together, and it's when you said anti-capitalist, in a sense, it's a small strike against capitalism, but it's more toward cooperation. You get these coupons for Coventry dollars when you shop at one merchant, and then you can use them in another. And I think small anti-capitalist localized systems could be developed. I know in Ithaca, New York, they had a whole thing called Ithaca Dollars, and it was very consciously anti-capitalist. And that would be great for progressive, you know, small progressive enclaves to do. I'm thinking Cleveland Heights might work, but it could work elsewhere around the county. And I think it's a really worthwhile thing to do, especially around Christmas time. The Coventry merchants do it at Christmas every year. And it's in order to get people to patronize locally owned enterprises, as well as be a little bit anti-capitalist.
On that track, try Loiter in East Cleveland. Sells food. It's a coffee shop. They sell a variety of small items, but it's definitely opposed to the powers that be around here.
Well, there's also the co-op circle. Do other people know about that? That there have been a number of worker-owned cooperatives, some nonprofit and others for profit, and they have joined together. So there is a growing movement, cooperative movement, and it's co-op circles, and they are in touch with cooperative movements in Cincinnati, Dayton, and Columbus, I believe. And Cleveland Owns is helping with all of that, and they are funding education so that people who are starting cooperative businesses have the information and support that they need. And there is startup money. So in terms of anti-capitalist opportunities, that looks like one that is picking up steam here.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you all. I see Shereen put a post in the chat. There will be a winter souk at Vendor Hall with Palestinian vendors on the 13th. Where's the location of the winter shop, Shereen?
I think it will be at La Center.
At La Center on Brook Park Road.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But I just
Oh no, that's not La Center's out in Westlake, right? Yeah. We'll post it on the Cleveland Peace Action Facebook page. Speaking of Facebook page, we have posted some of the testimony from the Cuyahoga County Council meeting last Tuesday regarding the Israel bonds. So you can see some of those testimonies.
Could I
So
just
we're
make
at
an
the end of
announcement?
our hour here. Go ahead, Harriet.
Yeah, the Cleveland Heights Dems is trying to sponsor a resistance fair in early to mid-February. We don't have a date yet. We think it's going to be at the Disciples Church. It's one of the Saturdays in February. We haven't decided on a date yet, but we may not even be able to sponsor it because it's partisan. But we're trying to get groups together that are participating in local, a lot of local activity, and the idea is to inform people of what is out there in the way of resistance, and also help people, get involved. We'd love to have 30 groups there so that people can come and, and find out how to get more active in whatever area interests them, but also moving toward, all of us working together.
Absolutely. Any last words from any panelists? And I'll close with a short poem.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows, maybe you might want to check out the American Indian Movement of Ohio Facebook page. Apparently, the other day, C-SPAN had shared a video of a couple representatives speaking to the rest of the group there about President Biden pardoning Leonard Peltier, who's been in prison for over 50 years, being accused of killing two FBI agents 50 years ago, and the evidence does not show that at all. And even the judge that was the prosecuting judge in the case is also asking, for some humanity to let this man whose health is failing, to let him go home to South Dakota to die with his family. So if you can find the Leonard Peltier Defense Fund or letters, I think I had posted some contacts to the White House to ask for Peltier to be released. I'd greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Philip. Free Leonard Peltier. I want to thank all the panelists again for your committed words tonight and your assistance with putting on this program. Thank you so much. I'll finish off with a short poem by poet Kaula Badwan, and the title is Keep Telling of Gaza. To love the land, even when it's burnt, to love freedom, even when it looks impossible, to love justice, even when it's far away, to love the old house, even when it's just rubble. Such is to practice love in a loveless world daily. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you. Bunch of different what?
Don, thanks for the invitation to be on the panel. Appreciate y'all putting this together.
Thank you for
Yeah,
coming.
definitely.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
echo that.
Yeah.
Pleasure to meet all the other panelists. I feel like I learned a lot tonight too.
So there's a Palestinian festival this weekend, right?
Yes, there's a Palestinian Culture Festival this weekend. I'll be teaching sewing, which is actually what I've been working on while we're sitting here. And we'll have food and dance and drumming too.
Good. Yeah, I hope to be there.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, it's 3 to 8 at the Betanina Community Center.
Cool.
Excellent.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right,
Good night.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Bye.
Good night.